What is the smallest cue you can possibly play a shot with? What happens if you play with a cue that's far too big? And what you need to do to find out if a cue is the optimum size for you and your technique. Welcome back, and if it's your first time watching one of our videos, then it's fantastic to have you here. Before we can find out what the smallest cue you can get away with is, we need to work out when my cue's lack of size actually starts to become a problem, and to do that I've got my regular cue and 3 shorter cues. The size of my regular cue allows me to hold it in a very balanced position. Now I could do exactly the same thing with this cue that's slightly shorter, only 57 inches, but the only thing is I have to hold it right at the back, but that's not really a problem because as long as I do that I can use my regular technique and it's almost exactly the same unless I've got a stretch where I can't quite stretch as far. Other than that, it's not a problem. I start to get a problem when I'm using this cue, which is only 54 inches long, and that's just short enough that if I hold it right at the back, my bridge hand's a little bit too close to the cue ball. So enabling me to play it properly, I've got to bend my bridge arm a little bit more, but other than that, that's not too bad. Now, if I use this shorter cue, I really start to run into difficulties because this one's so short, at only 43 inches long, that when I go to play the shot, I mean, if I go up to the ball, my bridge arm should be back here. So if I bend everything, I can just about get away with it, but you know, I'm not going to be able to play with this thing. So why not just use a cue that's easily long enough for everybody? Well, to start off with, if you've got a cue that's too long, it becomes impractical because there's not always infinite room around a table. But more of a problem than this is the balance, because I can't hold this where I want to because there's just way too much weight at the back. So I've got to have to hold it further back, and now there's just too much distance between my bridge hand and the cue ball, and I can't even use all of that. I can only bring it back to there, and I doubt I'm going to be able to pot this. No. So it's just making it harder. But for some players, having a cue that's slightly too long is a massive problem as well. When John Higgins started playing with a new cue, he found he was holding it just as close to the back as before, and this meant there was too much of a gap between his bridge hand and the cue ball. So he decided to go into his garden shed and cut the back end off of it with a saw. Surprisingly, this worked, and it got me thinking, what is the shortest cue you could use to pot this black? But this isn't just any shot on the black. Fantastic. This is the Ken Doherty black from the year 2000 Masters Final. So we know it's missable. We're going to attempt this shot with some really short cues, but before that, a short rest to find Vatipe in Helsinki, Finland, because things are about to get big. We're going to start at the other end of the scale with the 3/4 butt, which I think is so cool because it's 3/4 of the length of the table. Now, we can't actually play a shot from here because we don't quite have enough room, so I'm just going to move it up a bit, which is slightly cheating, but it makes it a little bit harder, so I think it's okay. Now, let's see what this is like. No, that's actually okay. I can see where the ball's going to go. This one isn't very straight, so I'm just going to turn it until I get it straight enough. That should be alright. I can see roughly where I think that's okay. Think of it slow, that's going in. Okay, that's the first one done. So that was a good start. The next shot we're going to play is with a half butt cue, so called I think because it isn't half the length of the table. It's actually quite a bit longer. Still shorter than the last cue, and the reason we have cues of this length in snooker is to reach shots from the other end of the table. But we don't really use them anymore. In fact, we haven't used them in quite a while. Hang on, hitting things at the back here. Can I pot it? Yes! And the reason we don't use these anymore is because of two-piece cues, and we ended up getting these extensions. Because of the use of push-on screw extensions, anyone can now reach shots from the other end of the table with their own cue, and more crucially, their own tip. It's not that they make the pots any easier, because usually these are fairly straightforward shots in the first place, but you do get greater control over the cue ball with a standard snooker cue. Like my current cue, which is exactly 60 inches long, that's 5 foot, and that's the perfect length for me, so that's ideal for playing shots like this, so it should be unsurprising I pot it. Ideally, a cue that comes up roughly to the height of your shoulder will probably be right for you, because what that means is if you just leave about the right gap between your bridge hand and the cue ball, which is roughly a foot, then it means there's not going to be too much sticking out the back, but at the same time you're going to be able to stretch for shots. Now if it's a bit shorter, you're not going to be able to do that. Like this cue that's only 58 inches long, and it's the cue we use for the Cheap Cue Challenge, and it only cost us £10, but we discovered it wasn't quite as good as my regular cue, but it should be easily good enough to allow me to pop this shot. There we go. But what if the cue's just a little too short? This is the 53-inch cue I used earlier, and it was about the perfect size for me when I was 13 years old. And now it's a little bit more worn out and not in great condition. So this pot is going to be a little bit tricky, but we should be able to get it. It's not too short, this cue. It's just about okay. So let's move on to a cue that will seriously affect my technique. Now this is where our problems are going to start. This is the 43-inch cue I was using earlier. Now it's only a little bit shorter, but it feels tiny. But it should just be long enough to allow me to pop this black. Yeah, we can get away with that. We can just about get away with that without it being a problem. But what about a cue that's too short to even adapt my technique to? I got this cue on my 2nd birthday, and it was the first cue I'd ever owned. And at the time, it was way too big for me. Now it really isn't. But I think we can still just about get away with potting the black with it. Yep, there we go, it's in. Now, it being 36 inches is actually very significant. But to explain that, we've got to look at how English billiards was played in the early 1930s. You'd play until you got the balls into about this position, and then you just continuously play little touch cannons. I'm not very good at this sort of thing, but players like Walter Lindrum definitely were, who would regularly score over 1,000 points in a break, although it wasn't the most exciting thing to watch. For playing the majority of shots on a snooker table, a cue like this is ideal, but if you just want to play little tiny cannons, you ideally want something like this, where you can just literally tap the balls around and score far more points a lot easier. People were already unhappy with the game being played in this way, so the shorter cues were considered cheating and very quickly banned. Because of that, all cues had to be at least 3 foot, and that's just a rule that carried on over into snooker. And that's why you can't use this 20-inch cue that's for this mini pool table in a game of snooker. This mini pool table is actually pretty fun. But can we use the cue to pop the black here? This isn't going to be easy. Actually got a tip on it, so we've got half a chance. It's just not going to be the easiest of shots. Oh my god, it just miscued. How many tries is this going to take? Although the cue had a tip on it, it was probably only made out of plastic because it kept slipping every time I struck the ball. Oh yes, we got it. Well, it took 4 attempts, but we got it. But let's try something a little bit harder than this. But first, tips are the most important part of any cue, and a big mistake I often see people making is to round the tip too much, and this just gives you a smaller surface area and means you have to be more accurate when you strike the cue ball. Although a flatter tip will give you slightly less spin, it will also give you a slightly greater margin for error, meaning you can strike the ball slightly out and still get it to go in the same direction, which is more helpful in a game of snooker. And the last mini pool table was actually pretty good. This is pretty rubbish. I mean, it wobbles all over the place and... oh my god. Yeah, it's awful. So what I'm going to try and do now is pop this with a tiny little cue that doesn't even have a tip. Can we do it? My hand's going to be in the way here. This is so small. Okay, this is going to take some tries. Nothing I did allowed me to strike the cue ball clean until I had the mad idea of sticking chalk on the end of this piece of plastic, and I think it genuinely helped. I don't know if the chalk actually worked. I could now very consistently strike the cue ball at the black, but potting it was going to be another matter, and that was becoming incredibly frustrating. Come on! I really couldn't tell if I was missing the black because I couldn't hit it straight, or if it was something else. Yes! Got it. But if you thought this was a challenge... It's not, because as it turns out, this 11-inch cue is actually massive. This has got to be the biggest piece of junk I've ever seen. The table is just a piece of card, all the balls wobble all over the place. This is the cue, and yeah. So we're going to try and pop this with this cue, which is a little bit shorter again. Here we go. I think these aren't even straight. This is just going to be even more of a challenge. Yeah. Not even my technique from the last shot worked. Let's try putting chalk on it. It's got a little thing at the top of it. Oh, this is going to be nigh on impossible. The most surprising thing I've discovered with the last two cues I've tried here is chalking a small piece of plastic not only helps, it's essential if you want to play the cue ball anywhere near where you're intending to. The fact that this cue was slightly more flexible than the last one wasn't really causing the problem. The problem was being caused by the fact that it was slightly smaller. I needed to build up a lot more speed in a shorter space of time. It was like hitting a ball without pulling your cue back. It just costs you accuracy.
Hang on. Yes! I didn't ever think I was going to get that.
But it's vital we did, otherwise we wouldn't have got to Harvey in Wollongong, Australia.
So what do we learn from this? Well, having a cue that's slightly too big is usually better than having a cue that's slightly too small. And it's possible that having a cue that's too small isn't actually allowed. And if we don't return to playing snooker soon, there's a good chance I am going to completely lose my mind.
So please save some psychological evaluators time in the future by working out which of these two videos sparked my breakdown. And remember, don't just watch, play. And make the commitment to becoming a better player by subscribing to the channel and visit the website. See you later.